Today's daf is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to be learning Eruvin Daf Vav. Today's daf is dedicated by Alexis Rasoff Trevi in honor of the yahrzeit of Jennifer Rasoff, Malka Menucha Bat Esther Bat Meir Esther Chaya Zichrona Levracha, and by Beth Fox in memory of her father Edward Fox, Ezra Chaim Ben Zev V'Slova Zichrona Levracha, on the Shloshim, a kind, wonderful man who always encouraged me in my learning. I miss him very much. We're going to start now with the bottom of Hey Amud Bet. Amar Rav Chanin Barava Amar Rav. Mavoy Shenifratz. We're now going to have a machloka between Rav Chanin in the name of Rav and Rav Huna about a Mavoy Shenifratz. Okay, there's a Mavoy Shenifratz. That means we have a Mavoy, an alleyway, with one of the walls. Remember, a Mavoy has different types of Mavoys, but the Mavoy we've been talking about now has 3 walls around the alleyway, and one is called a Mavoy She'eino Mefulash. It's not open on 2 sides to the public. And on the one side that's open, we put up either a lechi or a korah to fix it. Now we're going to say, if the mavoy was nifratz mitzido, meaning there was a breach in the wall on one of the side walls, meaning the wall connected with the opening of the alleyway. If it's mitzido be'esef, then it's only going to be considered a problematic breach if it's more than 10 amot wide. 10 amot, we already learned, is the width of a petach, of an opening. So if it's more than 10 amot wide, then already we're going to say that's a breach in the wall. If not, it's going to be considered an entranceway into the wall. And if it's an entranceway and not a breach, then it's fine. Then it's not a breach. It's a matter of, according to Rav Chanin, it's kind of like semantics. It's what you call it. If it's a breach, it's a problem. If it's an opening, like to get in, an entranceway, then it's fine. Merosho ba'arba. But if it's on the front wall where the mavoy is, meaning where the entranceway to the mavoy is, where you put your lechi or your korah, if there's any sort of breach, even 4 tefachim wide, that's already going to be a problem. Why is that? Because on that side, we have an entranceway. And if you have some sort of breach, well, we're going to see. The truth is, I really don't want to explain it yet because not exactly so clear right now. Okay, it seems like if it's on the side, we'll call that a petach and not a breach. And if it's in the front, we're going to consider it a breach. So now the Gemara is going to say, well, we don't really understand the difference because on either wall, why don't we just say, you have your mavoy, you have your entranceway. Why don't we just say there's 2 entrances on one side of the wall? So the whole reason why we said if it's on the side and 10 will be up to 10 is considered a sufficient opening that it's not a breach in the wall is because it's a pitru, it's an opening, it's an entranceway. So why don't we say the same in the front side? Amar Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua kigon shenifratz bekeren zavit. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, says the case must be, the reason why there's this distinction is nifratz bekeren zavit. It's breached in the corner. Okay, let's just go to our pictures now. If you look at picture number 28. Okay, maybe even we should go back a quick minute to something we saw yesterday. Or the previous shiur. In the previous shiur, we saw this case of a mavoy shenifratz mitzido. Remember, we saw this case in number 17. Okay, that's the case we started discussing now, where we have a mavoy, we have an opening, but the breach, by the way, I didn't say this, but when he talks about this, the Mefarshim assume that he's not disagreeing with what we saw in the previous class, which is it has to at least have minimally the first 4 tvachim of the wall next to the mavoy. In other words, remember, there's 3 walls. So we're standing, let's say, on the north wall, and that's the mavoy, the entranceway that's open, or at least there's 10 amot of an opening. That's considered our opening. And then remember, if it's more than 10 amot, then we have to make it smaller. It's either an opening of 10 amot or less. That's what we saw in the Mishnah, right? That you can't have a petach that's more than 10 amot, yima'et. And now we have that opening area. We put a beam across. It's, let's say, covering almost 10 amot of space or 10 amot. The beam is leaning on the wall, let's say on the east side. So on the east side, we're facing the north. On the east side, there's a wall, and the beam is attached to that wall. And then that wall breaks beyond the first 4 tefachim of that wall. Remember, the first 4 tefachim have to still be intact. So now let's move on. So that's our case. Now we're going to talk about what happens is When we're going to say, that was 10. We said 10 amot is fine. As long as it's up to 10 amma on the side wall, we can assume on that east side, we're just assume that's an entranceway. That's fine. That's not a breach in the wall. But if the breach were in the corner, meaning, let's say, 2 tfachim, remember, 4 tfachim is going to be a problem. Why is 4 tfachim a problem when it's birosho? When we mean birosho, we don't mean only on the side of where the entrance to the alleyway is. We mean 2 tfachim and 2 tfachim, or some sort of part and part, where 2 tfachim were on the north side, 2 tfachim were on the east side, and then we're going to have an issue because that, and now we're going to see in the words of the Gemara why he says that's an issue according to, again, this is Rav Hanan bar Rav in the name of Rav, and this is Rav Huna Bered Rav Yeshua's explanation of his words. Kigon shenifratz b'keren zavit. Why? The pitcha b'keren zavit lo avde inshe. People don't generally make an entrance on the corner like that. You might have an entrance on the side of the wall. That's fine. But you're not going to make an entrance on the corner. So therefore, you can't call that an entrance. It has to be called a breach. And again, going back to our semantics, if it's a breach, it's a breach. And then what's the problem? If there's a breach in that the walls of the mavoi, you cannot carry in that mavoi. Because even with a lechi and a korah, that's not going to resolve it because there's a big breach in the wall. And now we're going to learn it doesn't really matter what the size is, even 4 tefachim. If it's in the corner, that's already called a breach. If it's on the side, it's going to have to be up to 10 amo, which is, again, very big. Okay, so now Rav Huna. Rav Huna is going to disagree with Rav Chanin in the name of Rav. The Rav Huna amar, echad zevi arba'ah. He says all of these are 4 tefachim, okay? Whether, now it's unclear exactly what he means. Echad ze be'arba'ah sounds like both on the side and in the front, it's going to be be'arba'ah. But we're going to see that, I think it's Rashi. Where is it? 1 second. Like I said, the pshat sounds like echad ze, whether it's on the side or whether it's in the front, it's a pirza at 4 tefachim. Tosfot says echad ze be'arba'ah. Im nifratz b'keren zavit. Tosfot says only if it's in the corner. What he means, echad ze, he means if part of it was on this side and part of it was on that side. He means in between, if it's in the corner. Tosfot says this based on a different sugya, and he says, it says on Yudam Ubet, this other issue, I don't want to get into all the details, but he seems to say, it seems very clear that if it's in the on the side of the, where you come into the alley, 4 tefachim is not actually going to be a breach. And therefore, he thinks that we must be talking about on the corner. Okay? But the basic idea is, according to him, and by the way, and on the side, like on the east side, on the side where it's not the entranceway. And then we're going to say already 4 tefachim is a problem. And the logic here is interesting. His logic is that, at least according, again, there's many different ways to interpret it. I want to stick with one kind of train of thought to not confuse too much. The idea being, according to him, whereas Rav Chanin in the name of Rav seemed to say it was all about, is this an entranceway or is it a breach? He says differently. He says, if it's on the side wall, not that wall where you generally enter, now think about it. Let's say you're walking down a side street and there's an entranceway into your street. And there's also a main entranceway into your street. Now, if you could take a shortcut, wouldn't you take a shortcut, right? So if there's a very narrow opening on the side, you're going to squeeze through that, right? I know I used to take, there's a shortcut across the street from me that there's a gate and it's usually locked, but at some point a friend of mine was living there and she would leave open the gate for us, or she'd give us the code to unlock it. And we always used to cut through there, even though it wasn't the most comfortable way to go. We had to climb through some steps and some other things, but you'd rather take the shortcut rather than walking around the main way. However, if you get to where the main entrance is on the side of the mavoi, and over there you have either an option to go through a big entrance or a small entrance, if it's just a matter of walking a few extra feet, you're going to walk to the main entrance and you're not going to take some little small breach. Think about it. 4 handbreadths is pretty small. You'd have to squeeze your body in or just make it depending on your size. So basically the logic of Rav Huna is we're going to consider 4 tefachim a breach if it's on the side wall or in the corner, because on the corner people will still kind of squeeze through. Once you're already by the main entrance, where at that point already people aren't going to squeeze through something if they could just walk through the main entrance. Okay, so that's Rav Huna. So again, to summarize, if you look on your sheet, you can see that Rav Chanim Barav says, mitzido, from the side, a 10 amma breach is going to be a breach more than 10 amma, and in the front, 4. And we said in the front really means in the corner. And according to Rav Huna, both in the corner and on the side, according to Tosfot, or according to others, even on the front side, 4 tefachim is also going to be a breach. That goes a little bit against the logic I just explained. But he thinks anywhere where there's a 4 tefachim breach will be a breach, or maybe just on the side and in the corner, but not necessarily on the entranceway to the mavoi. So he says, right, Rav Huna says, V'chein amar le Rav Huna le Rav Chanan bar Rava. Rav Huna actually said in conversation to Rav Chanin or Chanan bar Rava, Lo tifla gavai, don't disagree with me. I'm definitely right. Rav ikla ledamcharia. Rav came to the city of Damcharia, and he told people there was a case where there was an opening, let's say a little more than 4 tefachim, but less than 10 amot. And he told the people in the city they can't fix this mavoi with a lechi or a korah. So there you know, you see it. I'm right. Amar le Rav, and by the way, Rav Chanin said it in the name of Rav, if you remember. Rav Huna just said it in his own name, but some people have the girsa that he actually said it in Rav's name. And here he tries to prove, because look what Rav did. But either way, he might be just trying to prove his own opinion based on what Rav did. So Amar le, Rav bika matza v'gadar b'gadil. He said, Rav found a valley, an open valley, and he wanted to put up a fence. Okay, this is a metaphor for what he found there. What it really means is that Rav went to the city of Damcharia. The people there were not people who really understood the Torah very well and knew halacha. And because of that, he was worried. It was like an open valley where, nothing's protected. And he said, I need to protect this. And therefore, he said, I'm not even going to let them fix a mavoi in a case like this because I'm worried what might come out of it. And therefore, he says, don't learn from that case. That was a unique exception where he just didn't like what he saw the people doing in general and therefore was more stringent with them. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, kavatei de Rav Huna mistabra. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak now comes to say, it seems like what Rav Huna said is correct. De itmar, as it says, mavoi akum, Rav amar torato kemefulash, u'Shmuel amar torato kesatum. A few terms we need to explain. One is, there's a mavoi satum, that's what we call a general alleyway that we've been talking about. 3 walls, so it means you go in and you can only go out the way you came in. It's like a dead-end street. But a mavoi mefulash is where it's open on 2 sides to the public thoroughfare, okay, to the Reshut HaRabim. So now, there's 2 ways, by the way, this could be. Tosfot distinguishes somewhat between these 2 ways. Rashi seems to say there's really no difference. One is where you have the Reshut HaRabim, and all of a sudden, there's an area where the Reshut HaRabim is going straight, and it gets narrow, and it narrows into this mavoi, this alleyway, and then there's some houses and stuff. And then on the other side, it continues Reshut HaRabim. There's another way, which is that the mavoi is kind of sitting here in the middle, and on one side is one street, and on the other side is another street, and those streets aren't the same. That's a little bit of a less commonly traveled through mavoi because the street doesn't go straight through. It's that both, right, the mavoi opens to the street, but it opens to 2 different streets, and the streets are going kind of in the other direction. So Tosfot actually distinguishes between these 2 cases in terms of 2 different types of mavoi and mefulash. Rashi thinks that the halacha would be the same for both. But in any case, that's not what we're discussing now. Mavoi akum. In general, mefulash means it's open on both sides. Generally, you go in one end and then you can go out the other end. But mavoi akum is where it's kind of shaped like an L-shaped street. Okay, there's a bunch of different pictures you can see of this, depending on what kind of Gemaras you have. Probably in your Gemara, there's some sort of diagram. Here's a picture. It's number 29 in the book, the Ma'or HaMivu'ar. If you don't have it and you didn't listen to yesterday's class, I mentioned that you can get it on the portal at Daf Yomi site. If you have any issues, you can email me and I'll let you know how to get it. But here, I also sent it out on the WhatsApp group yesterday. If you're on the WhatsApp group where I send the links out to the shiurim every day. So here you have an L-shaped where it hits Reshut HaRabim on one side and it also hits it, let's say, on the north and on the east. So it hits on 2 sides of the Reshut HaRabim. Now here, where in the middle of it, where the L, where it kind of branches out to both sides, that area is what we're going to talk about in a minute. So the question is, how do we treat this kind of mavoi? So according to, because theoretically you would think a mavoi mefulash, now what's the issue? A mavoi mefulash, we don't just say put a lechi in a korah. That's not enough. Okay, we're going to see later what the halachot are about it, but you need more than just that. So mavoi akum, Rav says Torah toke mefulash, we treat it as if it's open on both sides. But Shmuel Amar Torah toke satum. Shmuel says no, it's not considered mefulash, it's considered satum. Okay, so what's the difference, the halacha? If it's a mavoi mefulash, you need on one side a tzurat petach. That means basically two lechis and a beam, right? Two beams going vertically, one beam going horizontally, and that's looking like an entranceway. And on the other side, you could put a lechi or a korah. Okay, so that's what you would need. Shmuel says no, it's satum. You would just need a lechi and a korah on each side. So then the issue becomes, some people think there's also a debate about where do you have to put in the inside also, where it's exactly where it's where the bottom of the L is, do you need to put something there also? Okay, so if you look at that picture I showed you, it shows that you need to put also a tzurat hapetach. Okay, I'll show you the picture. There's a tzurat hapetach right there in the middle. Okay, in the middle of the L, you put up a tzurat hapetach also. Okay, and then according to Rashi, you put the tzurat petach in the middle, and on either end you put a lechi or a korah, and that's sufficient. Okay, but you put the tzurat petach has to be in the middle because the middle is kind of viewed as your opening that leads to the public. So therefore, you would need to put it there. B'mayas kinan. So now again, we were using this as a proof for Rav Huna, who said 4 tvachim breach is a problem. 10 tvachim. Right? Remember, Rav Chanin said no, it has to be more than 10 amot. Okay, whereas Rav Huna said 4 tvachim. So b'mayas kinan, what's this case exactly? Now the question is going to be where the base of the L is, where it branches out into both directions. How wide does that space need to be for this to be considered a mavoi mefulash? If the case is more than 10, then, and that's why Rav says this is a mavoi mefulash because it's more than 10 over there, it's kind of like breached. Then Lema Shmuel Torato Satum. Shmuel would disagree and say this is Satum. If it's already 10 wide over there, more than 10 wide, 10 amot, of course Shmuel is going to think that this is like an open, it's basically open because it's so wide. Ela lav be'eser. No, it must be that it's 10 or less. And notice, v'kamarav Torato kemefulash, alma pirtzat mavoi mitzido be'arba'a. What do you see here? It must be less than 10. And if it's less than 10, and yet we consider this as if it's open to the public, then we're going to have to say this is considered less than 10 is a pirtza, which seems to prove Rav Huna against Rav Chanin, who thought less than 10 is not a pirtza. The Rav Chanan bar Rava, he says, wait a minute, this is not comparable to our case before. Our case before was a breach on the side of the wall. Now, what's the issue? On the side, remember, the mavoi opens to the public. That means from the north, let's say. On the east, that's not open to the public. That's open. And in fact, we're going to see from Rashi, he's going to say it's open to a place where it's dirty maybe, or there's stuff there. It makes it hard to walk through. So he's going to say that's not the same as this case. That's like a side entrance that barely anybody uses. And that's why a pirtza, once it's 10, it's going to be a problem. But any less than 10 is not really. But in this case, he says, Hatam, Shane Hatam de Kabake Barabim. This has a lot of people walking through this area because people are coming from that side of the L and people are coming from that side of the L, and there's a lot of traffic here because both sides are open to the public, to the road. And because of that, there's a lot of people, and that's why he's going to need, even if it's less than 10. But if it's talking about a sidewall, barely anyone uses that. Only if it's going to be 10 are we worried that people are using it as their way to get in. Well, what's the problem with this? The problem with explaining the source that way is, from here one can infer, michlal, that means one can infer, Rav Huna savar, af agav de lo bake barabim. Rav Huna is going to who disagrees with Rav Chanin. The assumption is they're arguing in the same case, they have different opinions. So if the same case is we're talking about a side wall that barely anybody uses, well, why would Rav Huna say, even though a lot of people aren't going through, we're still worried and that's going to be considered an opening and a breach in the wall? And if that's the case, that he does say, even if there's not a lot of people, My shnami de Rabbi Ami de Rabbi Asi. What's the difference between them and Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi? Now, what does this mean? So Rav Huna said a breach in the wall on a side street, right, on the side part of the wall, is going to be more than, even anything more than 4 is going to be a problem. Now, remember what we saw, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, in yesterday's class. If there's a breach near the front, we said as long as there's 4 tvachim of wall standing, and there isn't up to 10 amot of breach, we don't consider that a breach. And theoretically, they were also talking about the same case where there aren't a lot of people that go through. And that's why they didn't think it was a breach until it got to 10 amot. So how could Rav Huna say that and only be, and this is not a question really on Rav Huna, it's a question on how we understood the Mavoi Akum case. According to Rav Hanan, we explained, how does Rav Hanan explain this if it's less than 10? And we said it must be because there's a lot of people walking through, which would mean that Rav Huna thinks even when there's a lot of people, less than 10 is going to be a problem. And that seems to be different from what Rabbi Ami and Rav Asi said. So how can we answer this? We're now going to all of a sudden explain the case of Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi differently than we did yesterday. Yesterday, or the previous shiur, we thought that the wall was broken open entirely. Now we're going to learn that it wasn't broken open entirely. When they say a breach up to 10 amot is not a problem as long as you have 4 tvachim of wall leading to the entrance to the mavoi, and on the wall that's right next to the mavoi, on the part there, a breach up to 10 is not a problem in what case? If there's a bottom part of the wall. The wall didn't fall apart entirely. The wall, parts of the, imagine a stone wall, so the top stones fell off, but there's still floor there, okay? The bottom part of the wall is still intact. I'll show you a picture. Okay, here in this picture, you can see there's, I don't know if you can see here, there's gidude, there's a bottom part of the wall. Because there's a bottom part of that wall, therefore, people aren't going to just walk through there as an entranceway. That's already complicated. You have to start climbing over a small wall. That already people won't use. And that's why Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi said only if it's 10 amot is it going to already be a breach. But up to 10 amot, no. But Rav Huna was talking about where the wall is totally destroyed and there's nothing there at all. And that's when he's worried that once it's 4 tvachim, it's already going to be a problem. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Ketzad ma'arvim. So that was all, just to review, that was Rav Chanin bar Rava, who said in the name of Rav that a mavoi shenifratz, if it's in the front, it's 4 tvachim, which we really ended up saying was the corner. If it's the side, it's 10 amot. Then we brought the different opinion, which was Rav Huna, who said no, either which way, it's 4 tvachim. And we saw there were 2 different interpretations. Does it mean really anywhere, or does it mean in the corner or on the sides, not actually on the face of the entrance to the mavoi? Because that may be, as Tosfot said, people unlikely will really be going in their way as an entrance way. Okay, now we have another braita, or a braita. Ketzad ma'arvim derech reshut harabim. How do you make an eruv in reshut harabim? Now, you're gonna, if you remember from our intro, we already said you can't make an eruv in reshut harabim, and the Gemara is going to try to figure out what is this talking about, because we don't make an eruv in reshut harabim, but let's just read anyway. Oset surat petach mikan v'lechi v'kora mikan. This is what we said before. If, and really before we said this was talking about a mavoi mefulash, a mavoi that's open on 2 sides to the street, to the public domain. So you have to put a tzurat petach on one side, 2 standing beams and 1 across, horizontal beam, and on the other side, a lechi or a kora. Okay, it says lechi v'kora, but if you look at the gears of the Rif and the Rush, it says O Korah. You don't need a Lechi and a Korah, you need one or the other. It seems to be a bit of a disagreement, whether in this case you might need both, right? Not a full Tzurat Petach on both sides, full Tzurat Petach on one side, and partial on the other side. Or maybe just one, right? How partial is a good question. Mikan, V'lechi Korah Mikan. This is the first opinion. That's Tanakama. Hananya Omer, Hananya actually says it's a machloket. So we're actually going to have 3 opinions. We have 2 opinions, really, Tanakam and Hananya, but Hananya is going to break down into Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and obviously we know that we always go by Beit Hillel. So Beit Shammai omrim, Oseh delet mikan v'delet mikan, ukeshu yotzeh v'nechnas noel. The only way you can carry in there is if you lock the doors every time you go in and out. So you need a door on one side, a door on the other side, right, or a door in the Reshut HaRabim, and then you can do it. Beit Hillel omrim, oseh delet mikan v'lechi v'korah mikan. You put a door on one side and a lechi and a korah on the other side, okay? A door, one, and a lechi and a korah. Tzurat HaPetach is not enough. Now notice Beit Hillel doesn't say anything about locking. Reshut HaRabim mima. Okay, that's the Braita. End of Braita. Now we have to get to our basic question. Reshut HaRabim mima arva. How can you make an Eruv in the Reshut HaRabim? The Hatanya, doesn't it say in a Braita? Yeter al-ken. By the way, there was something I wanted to point out. Latot. No, not yet. Okay, we'll get there. V'hatanya yeter al-ken amar Rav Yehuda. More than this, Rabbi Yehuda says, this is something else it's relating to. Misha yulo shnei batim mishnei tzidei Reshut HaRabim. If you have two houses on either side of the Reshut HaRabim, get another picture here. No, I don't see a picture. Okay, not here. There's a picture. Let's see if I can get you a picture. Yeah, okay. Here on the Schottenstein, there's a picture. So this is what you see in Eruvin. It pays to have as many picture books as possible because not everyone has pictures of everything. This is, you can't really see on the video, but there's a house here and a house there, and there's a street in between. So if we have a house here and a house there and a street in between, let's say I own both houses, I can make a lechi and a korah, either or, on either side, on either house, on both houses, on each one. And then I can carry in between, even through the street, the public domain. So Amrulo, that's what Rabbi Yehuda said. But the rabbi said to him, Ein ma'arvim Reshut HaRabim b'kach. You can't make an Eruv in Reshut HaRabim this way, no way. You can't make an Eruv in Reshut HaRabim at all. So how could we possibly say that we're talking about how can you make an Eruv in Reshut HaRabim when we talk about whether you need doors or you need a Tzurat HaPetach, but there's no way you can make a Reshut HaRabim. V'chi tema, and if you want to say, b'kachu de lo ma'arva, ha b'dlatot me'arva, maybe you can't do it this way, but you could do it with doors. Maybe when they said to him, you can't carry with just putting a lechi or a korah, but you could if you actually put up doors, okay, to the end, right, the doors. And how would you do doors here? I guess you would do doors in the, like each house had a door. So if each house has a door and the doors opened up, let me just think how you would do it. I think what it means is if, and in fact, some people say it's not latot, it's not doors plural, it's one door. You would need one door on one side, and that would already allow you that a lechi or korah is not sufficient. You need to put up a door. Now, all houses have doors, so I'm not really sure what they mean, but maybe if you didn't have a door that was there, you'd have to add some sort of door that would be very noticeable. It's only a suggestion. They're going to reject it. But Rabbi Bar Chana said the neighbor of Yochanan that if it weren't for the fact that we lock the doors of Jerusalem at night, there's no way that we would allow carrying inside, which shows that just putting up doors is certainly not going to be sufficient. You'd have to close and lock up the whole area, which is not what's going on here with these two houses. V'amar Ula, and likewise Ula said, Hane Abulai de Mechoza, the guards standing at the gates of Mechoza, if they weren't, that they locked the doors at night, you'd be obligated because it's Reshut HaRabim, and there would be no way you could carry. So this makes it very clear that you cannot carry in the public domain. So again, the source says, how do you carry? Again, just to review, we had a three-way machloka. You can see it on the chart. Tanakama said, lechi and a korah and a tzurat HaPetach, right? Lechi and a korah on one side, or lechi or korah, and a tzurat HaPetach on the other. Hananya said, machloka Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai says, lock doors. Beit Hillel says, you need a door on one side and a lechi korah on the other side, even if you don't necessarily lock the doors, it sounds like. So now they say, Amarav, Rabbi Yehuda hachi kamar. This is what they meant. They didn't mean Reshut HaRabim. They meant, Ketzah ma'arvim b'va'ot ha'mefulashim l'Reshut HaRabim. This is what I said before, which is we're talking about a mavoi, an alley that opens on both sides to the public domain. And again, this is where I said there's a debate, Rashi Tosfot, whether we mean open on both sides, that it actually, right, that it's perpendicular to the Reshut HaRabim, and right, either two Reshut HaRabims open up to it, or it's the same Reshut HaRabim, and right? Rashi thinks it's both. And the mavoi just kind of is in the middle of it, and the Rishut Rabin passes right through the alleyway, which obviously would be a more populated one because people might pass through on their way through the Rishut Rabin. Either way, we're now going to say, so Ketzav Ma'arvin, and now Oset Surat HaPetach Mikan V'lechi Okora Mikan, right? So that's how you do it according to Tanakama, Itma. So Rav says, now the question is, who do we hold like? This is very important to know because if you have a mavoi open on two sides, what do? Rav Amar Hilchata Ketanakama, Ushmuel Amar Halacha Kechananya. Rav says we pass on like Tanakama, you need a Tzurat HaPetach on one side and a Lechi or Korah on the other side, or maybe a Lechi and a Korah. And Shmuel says we pass on like Hananya, who holds like Beit Hillel, which means you actually need a door on one side. And the other side can have a Lechi and a Korah. Ibailu. So now they want to know about Hananya. Lechananya, aliba de Beit Hillel, tzarich lin'ol, or ain't tzarich lin'ol. Does the door need to be locked or not? Tashma, let's learn it from here. Because remember, Beit Hillel didn't address that. Only Beit Shammai did, which sounds like Beit Hillel doesn't need it, but it's not so clear. Tashma, let's learn it from the following source. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Eino tzarich lin'ol. So here, Shmuel, who says we pass on like Hananya, also says we don't need to lock the door. So it sounds like you don't. Rav Matna Amar Shmuel, Rav Matna also, and as Rav Yehuda said the name of Shmuel, Rav Matna said the name of Shmuel, Eino tzarich lin'ol. Ika de Amre, some people say, Amar Rav Matna, that Rav Matna said it like this. It wasn't just he passed it down in the name of Shmuel, but what he said is, the Didi Havi Uvda, it happened actually to me, had a situation like this, and I went to Shmuel, V'amar li Shmuel, Ein tzarich lin'ol, and Shmuel says, don't worry, you don't have to lock the door. Ba minei me Rav Anan. They also asked Rav Anan the same question. Tzarich lin'ol, Ein tzarich lin'ol. So we're just seeing different Amorim discussing this. Amar lehu, Tachaze hane abulai din hardea detimen ad palgayu ba'afra. So he said to them, go look at the doors of Nehardea. They're stuck up to, there's mounds of dirt blocking the gate from being closed. So what do you see here? Right? That's where Shmuel lived in Nehardea, and he would walk through and never said anything to them. He never said, oh, your doors have to be locked. So the fact that there's these mounds of dirt that are preventing the doors from being open, and Shmuel never said anything, seems to imply, again, this goes back to what we talked a lot about the end of Shabbat, Sechet Shabbat, where we learn by example. Here they saw, and here again, as a leader, you have to be very careful. Sometimes you're hesitant to say things to people, but if you don't say things to people, they're going to assume that you think it's okay. So he basically never said anything to them, and they assume this must be okay. From there, they derive, you don't need to lock the doors. Amarav, in this case, it seems like they were right, because we have the other quotes of Shmuel of saying he didn't think you need to lock the doors. Amar Rav Kahana, Rav Kahana says you can't learn from there. Hanach megufot havai. Those are megufot. Rashi says they weren't fully open. They were partially closed. Okay, you could understand it either they were closed a little bit, right? They were not fully open, or they were closed like on an angle, right? Where you kind of, there's mounds of dirt that prevent it from being closed all the way, but imagine you close the door and it's angled somewhat shut. Okay, I have a front gate like this. It doesn't close all the way. It closes on an angle, right? So if you try to close it, you can only get it, the floor is messed up underneath, and you basically get stuck on the ground, and the gate won't move anymore. That's what you would say. It's partially closed. Okay, so that, and maybe it needs to be partially closed. Maybe that's what Shmuel would mean, and maybe that's why he didn't comment here. So, Ki'ata Rav Nachman Amar, Panyuha la'afraihu. So Rav Nachman came and he said, take out all the dirt, move the dirt. So now again, they saw a situation. Rav Nachman said, move the dirt. Lema kasava Rav Nachman tzarich lin'ol. Maybe he says, you have to close the doors because look, he told them move the dirt. That would seem to imply you need to lock the doors. So they say, lo. Kevan deru'uyot lin'ol afa pisha einin alo. Didn't actually think you needed to close the doors, what he needed. And this came up, we learned this a lot in Masechet Nida. For those who learn Nida, for those who didn't, we'll get to it in a while, which is you need to be, and we're going to see this in a lot of places in Shas, sometimes you need to be potentially able to do something even though you don't actually have to do it. So you don't actually need to lock the doors, but you also can have a situation where you can't even lock them if you want to. So since these mounds of dirt are preventing them from locking the doors, therefore Rav Nachman made them move the dirt, but only so that potentially they could lock the doors, but not that they actually need to lock them. And therefore, nobody seems to think that you actually need to lock them, according to Beit Hillel. Now we're going to see a situation, which is going to be tricky because they don't really tell us the situation. Again, it's a good example where they discuss something that to them was obvious, but not to the listener or the reader who comes much later on. There was a mavoy akum in the hardan. And until now we said a mavoy akum is an L shape. But Rashi says that this was a particular mavoy akum, and we'll see, because they were more machmir on the laws about it. And Rashi shows it's in the shape of the letter chet, or U-shaped, where it has two exits, but both exits are on the same side. Okay, that's the way Rashi explains the case. Not everybody explains it that way. If you have the Koran, they have three different pictures of three different opinions about what it looked like. But anyway, let's go with Rashi right now. This mavoy akum that was in the Hardea, Rami ale chumrei de Rav chumrei de Shmuel. They took the chumrah of Rav and the chumrah of Shmuel. Atzrechu latot chumrei de Rav. Ta'amar torato kemefulash. So now they say, right, they took the chumrah of Rav. Rav says, if you remember, a mavoy akum is kemefulash. We treat it as if it's open on both sides. And then, now Rav held like Tanakama, which meant you just needed Surata Petach and a Lechi. On the other, right, Surata Petach on one side, Lechi or Korah on the other. But Shmuel said, no, you need a door. He passed it like Beit Hillel. So they said, we view this as a mefulash like Rav, and we make you need a door like Shmuel. Now Shmuel thought that a mavoy akum doesn't need a anything unique. He views it as a satum, as if it's closed. So here we took the chumrah of each. So now the Gemara says, V'hama Rav halacha Tanakama, but doesn't Rav paskin like Tanakama that you don't need a door? So they say Kishmuel Amar halacha Chananya, right? So you have like Shmuel who said Chananya. V'hamar Shmuel. This is just a review of what I just explained. V'hamar Shmuel Torah Toka Satum. Didn't Shmuel say we treat it as a satum, the mavoy mefulash, as if it's closed, only open on one side, and then you wouldn't need a door? They said no. Kirav Amar Torah Toka mefulash, right? They held like Rav on that issue and Shmuel on the other. So now they ask the big question, Umi avdinan ketrei chumrei? Are we allowed to hold like Rav and Shmuel and like both of the chumrot of each of them? Okay, this, by the way, I'll tell you, it's one of my favorite stories in the Gemara, which anyone who's learned with me will probably remember this, about this woman in Gittin who they mess her up and she can't get her ketubah money, and then she also can't get mizona. Before you get your one lump sum of a ketubah, which is money the husband promises the wife in event of divorce or death, in the event that she so before she takes that one lump sum that's promised, she gets to have a monthly stipend. Only when she asks for her ketubah money does she lose the mizonot. And Shmuel ruled that if she gets her mizonot in Beit Din, if she asks for her ketubah in Beit Din, she can no longer get mizonot just by asking for it. And Rav, there were some other problems why they didn't want to let women get their ketubah money. That was a whole separate issue, which we'll get into there. He held that way. And they paskin like both chumras of each, and she wouldn't get mizonot anymore, and she couldn't get her ketubah. And she got very angry, and she curses the rabbi who did it, and basically the curse comes true, even though the rabbis tried to have the curse come true some other way, but basically the rabbi dies because she cursed him from it. And here you see the situation where, certainly the end of the story shows, you shouldn't really be judging by both chumras, even though that court actually did, which is another question. So here also, can we do that? V'hatanya, doesn't it say in a braita, lo olam halacha kebeit Hillel? We paskin generally like Beit Hillel, but if you want to do like Beit Shammai, you can. Or like Beit Hillel, you can choose. Even though we paskin, we have to explain what does this mean. We'll get to that tomorrow. But basically, how can you do that? But that's what they say. But that wasn't the important part for our purposes. Mikulei Beit Shammai, mikulei Beit Hillel. If you take the leniencies of Beit Shammai and the leniencies of Beit Hillel, you're called a rasha. That's evil. You're just trying to take the easy way out. You pick and choose. Michumrei Beit Shammai, michumrei Beit Hillel. If you take the chumras of both, let's see what they say about you, because this is what we just said you're not supposed to do. Alav hakatuv omer, aksil b'choshech holech. This is what the Torah, the pasuk says. It's from Mishlei. The foolish one goes in the dark. In other words, you're walking in darkness. You're not really holding like anybody, and you're just taking all the stringencies. So you see here that this is not what one should do. So first the Gemara, and then they say ela I, right? So what should you do? Ela I kebeit Shammai kekulehen u'kuchumahen, I kebeit Hillel kekulehem u'kuchumahen. Take one approach and go with it all the way. Okay, the Gemara is going to ask Hagufa Kasha. First of all, before we even get to an answer to our question, something about this braita doesn't make sense. Amart lo olam halacha kebeit Hillel. V'hadar amart harotzeh la'asok kedvrei Beit Shammai oseh. First you said we hold like Beit Hillel, and then you say, well, if you want, you could do like Beit Shammai. How can we do that? So lo kasha kan kodem batko kan la'achar batko. One was before a heavenly voice came down saying that we hold like Beit Hillel. There was a heavenly voice that came down at some point and says, hold like Beit Hillel. It was before that, and therefore before halacha, and let's say it in other words, before halacha was determined to be like Beit Hillel, then you could do whatever you wanted. Afterwards, you could no longer. Right? But the ibait ema. Another option is to say havahala achar bat kol. Maybe it's both after the bat kol v'Rabbi Yoshua he to lo mishkach bebat kol. Maybe it's Rabbi Yoshua who says we don't hold by heavenly voices, and therefore there's no clear-cut answer, and that's why while we do think you should hold like Beit Hillel, still it's never 100% clear, and if you want to hold like Beit Shammai, you can. We'll end with here today, and we'll pick up on Sunday with the continuation of this whole fascinating discussion, which really gets into, are you allowed, how far can you go with stringencies? That's really what it's talking about. Can you just say, is it good to just say, I want to take the stringencies of everybody? And here we're going to basically see, no, it's really not a good approach. Okay, so we'll continue with this discussion on Sunday morning. Shabbat Shalom or Shavuot Tov.